Hello, everybody. First, I want to say thank you to our organizers and Course Hero and Chris and Alex for having me. And thank you all for taking the time. I know this is a busy time for all of us. So thank you very much for taking the time to put up with me. I'll try and keep it to the point. So what I want to talk to you about today is kind of flipping the assessment process. And I'll start by asking a question. It was a question that was posed to me by the organizers. I guess they sent out an email to several of the speakers asking, what is academic integrity? And so I actually want to start by opening up a dialogue and find out what you all feel about what is academic integrity. Somebody want to shoot out their idea of what integrity is?
I think it's doing your own work and being responsible for your own work.
Good. Certainly ownership is a huge part of it. Now, are you at a university or a community college? Just curious.
It's modeling what I expect of my students. So if I expect them to do the right thing, I must do it as I prepare to teach them and prepare their lessons.
Excellent, excellent.
I think it's also ensuring that you reach all of your students, just whatever their background is, so that what you're teaching and having them engage in isn't made for just a portion of them.
Oh, wow, that's like teaching integrity too. That's great. Other voices and thoughts?
We have Stephanie Martin in the chat, honesty and transparency.
Ooh, I like the transparency too. So the answer that I gave was this: a person cares if their actions are viewed as right or wrong, even if they are not observed. So really, it's what they do when people aren't looking, right? Can I glance at my notes? Can I look at something on the internet? If I'm taking a test, how much can I cut and paste before it's plagiarism? I'm sure we're all familiar with that one. That's the one that I probably hate the most. It's probably one of the easiest to identify when it happens. And it's the one that students probably do the most, or at least it comes up quite a lot. And they even have these newfangled programs now that will go through their plagiarized work and give them a percentage of plagiarism. And then they just start changing words using synonyms. So it changes their percentage score. That's also easy to pick up. But really, if it's about this idea of what people do when they aren't looking, it has a lot to do with this inner quality, right? And it shouldn't matter if it's a paper or a test. For the student, when there's a lot riding on it, the stress is really high. And I think that's one of the things that tends to lead to academic dishonesty, is they have a lot of stress over something. There's a lot riding on it. These grades are really important. They want to stay in school, etc. And sometimes it looks like a low cost action to do something that might be slightly dishonest, like this copying and paste and such. And so what I want to talk to you about today is a different way of doing things, more of academic expression, where we remove the temptation to do all these kinds of things. It's a way for you to assess true knowledge where notes are irrelevant, there's not any copying and pasting, there's not looking up on the internet for these kinds of answers. They're going to give you a true and authentic answer, and you'll be able to evaluate it as such. And so what I'm talking about is peer teaching. This is where the student becomes the teacher. You give them the opportunity to explain face-to-face their understanding of a concept. They'll synthesize what you've taught in the course on a particular topic, and then they'll attempt to teach it back to you and to the rest of the class. And that can be really very, very beneficial. They'll record it, and then this way it's available to the class, so they have multiple ways to learn a particular topic. You'll explain it one way, Other students will explain it using their experiences. Sometimes their experiences are far more accessible to those other students. So in my classes, what we do every week for every important concept, I'll assign to the class a question. And it might be something like, so I teach biochemistry, so it might be something like teach the hydrophobic effect. And I might give them a couple cues in there. Well, if you're going to talk about the hydrophobic effect, make sure to mention something about water cages and entropy, and I'll throw out a couple terms that I know are important to the answer. Or maybe I won't mention those. Depends on exactly what level of knowledge and nuance I want them to reach. And a lot of these will last not very long, anywhere from 4 to 10 minutes, because it's a single concept. Any of you who are familiar with the concept of micro teaching, this is kind of like micro teaching, because you focus on a concept, you've already taught it in class, hopefully they've learned, and this is a demonstration of their knowledge, and in that way, it's an assessment. So to do this, I use a platform called Flipgrid. I don't know how many, is there anybody here that's used Flipgrid before? It's a really neat platform. It's very user-friendly. You can access it from any browser. You can actually access it from your phone as well, the browser on your phone. It will automatically sync up to the camera in the laptop or on the phone. So there's really no setup, no installation or anything like that. You can just go onto the site, put your question up. If you want to have a video version of you asking the question, you can put that up, or you can just put it up in writing. And I'll do this for all of my different classes. You can see here I have a few different classes set up. You can go into a class, and then a class could be divided into topics for each of these different Flipgrids. And then once you pick a topic, then you can have some instructions like you see over here on exactly what you want them to do, the prompt that you're going to give them. And then you let them have at it. And you would be surprised, I know I was really surprised with some of the ingenuity of these kids, especially kids that I didn't expect to be very engaged in the class, because you know, we all had to switch suddenly because of the pandemic to this online teaching. So I was familiar with some of the students beforehand in classrooms on ground. And so I kind of had an idea of who I thought might be more engaged or less engaged. And I was kind of surprised at how many folks really put some more effort into it. I noticed a question here, does Flipgrid work with major learning management systems like Canvas? Yes, basically all you'll do is you'll put in a link to it. It's really easy on Flipgrid. Once you put in the question, they give you a link that you can then put on your Moodle page or Canvas or whatever. They click on it, it takes them right to that question. They can record their answers and such. And then you'll go in there to watch, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the grading and how that stuff enters back in. So you've got this platform, you've asked them this question, and they take some period of time to give their answer. What's unique, I think, about the way that I do the Flipgrid and Pure Teaching is once they've recorded it, the video process isn't over. What I like to do, and I'll usually use Zoom to do this because it's really easy to record things in Zoom. I'll start a Zoom window, I'll shrink it down like you kind of see right over here. I'll bring up Flipgrid in their video, and then I'll record myself watching their video. So they begin teaching in their video. Sometimes they'll use, you know, pictures like you saw up here. Sometimes they'll be holding up little notebooks, you know, where they've got some writing. However they want to teach it. Some students use props. And I'll videotape myself watching theirs. And then when they say something I want to respond to, I'll just hit pause on their recording. And then I can extemporaneously respond to what they're saying, you know, say, oh, good job, you understand this, or, oh, there's a little nuance here I don't think you're picking up. And so it almost feels like a back and forth, and I can start it up again. And one of the things I like about this is that's all you have to do in terms of the grading. So, you know, when you do paper grading, can take hours and hours. I don't know how much time you would devote to assessing a single assignment. Here, if they've got a 4-minute video, your total assessment time is going to take you about 4.5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, because I don't watch the video first and then record it. I just watch it for the first time, record myself watching it, give them my feedback, and then tell them what kind of grade that I think that I'm going to give them for that, and then just enter that into my grade book. The other thing that I do, so once I've made this recording, there's a really easy way to upload these in Flipgrid. You can do them in Flipgrid and just hit a button that emails that back to them so they can see that feedback immediately. But if I've thought they've done really well, like say they did A-level work, it's a great explanation, I think it's a good example for the class, I'll make it visible. So there's a lot of different settings in Flipgrid. You can make them automatically visible when they record them to everybody in the class, or you can say, well, wait till I've looked at them all, and then I'll make certain ones visible. That's what I tend to do, except for the introductory video at the beginning of the course. I'll tend to have it set so they all have to put in their Flipgrids by a certain time or certain day, and then I'll start watching them. And then since it's after the due date, no new ones are coming in. And then when I find good ones, I'll make it visible to the rest of the class. And what's great about this is you can also show snippets of these during your regular class period. If you want to go over a topic and say, oh, Maddie was really good at explaining this particular concept here, let's see what she had to say. You would be surprised the effect it has on students to become a model to the class. And this is something I'll share in just a minute with you. The basic idea going into this that I had is what I wanted to do with Flipgrid, and this is a big problem that I saw in online teaching, was this whole idea of engagement, trying to really engage students when they're at a distance doing online learning. And I really wanted to build a sense of community. And this kind of helps with that. So not only are you giving one-on-one extemporaneous feedback to what they're saying, but they also get to see what other students are doing and what other students are thinking. And it gives them a large repository of things that they can use to study for other exams or assignments or understanding. And I tend to think that that does well for making a class feel cohesive. I do have to say my first time doing this was last fall semester, and my biochemistry class usually runs around about 45 students, 45 to 50 students. And for the first time in the 10 years I've been teaching the class, I really felt like I got to know all of the students really well, because I'd assign, one Flipgrid a week. And so every week I'd be seeing each student for, 4 or 5 minutes, talking back and forth with the student kind of. And since I had an introductory video Flipgrid in the beginning of the course where they introduce themselves and say, what they're interested in, et cetera, what they hope to get out of school, I could always relate back in my responses to things they had told me before. And it really seemed to bring a cohesion to class where we really got to know each other. You've probably all seen, or if not said, this particular quote before. I never really understood a topic until I had to teach it. I know as a teacher, I felt that way so many times with a new course and having to do a new prep. And I think that's true of the students as well. So part of the idea in this is that for these Flipgrids, and this is what I was really surprised at, students really prepare for these Flipgrids because they know they might be visible to other students in the class. And for a lot of students, for at least a section of students, that's a strong motivation. For another section, it might be they want to look good for the professor, right? Others might just be doing it because they have to. I'll go over some of those percentages in a little bit. But students tend to prepare. If you think about it, when you're going to teach, you have to think about what you're going to say. You have to think about how you're going to say it. You have to resolve problems in your own understanding, like, oh, do I really get that clearly? And that's what students have to do when they're prepping for these Flipgrids. And a lot of times they'll come up with pictures or drawings that they want to help illustrate. Sometimes they'll come up with props that they want to use, and it's actually quite creative. But don't take my word for it. I'd like to include right here an actual student's response where I'd asked them about Flipgrid and how it helped. So here we go. Let's hear from Damien.
Hi everybody, my name is Damian George, and for the last Flipgrid of this year, I wanted to say that I think Flipgrid has helped me. First off, it's helped me learn a lot of stuff, like actually learn it instead of memorize a bunch of stuff. It's actually helped me learn and actually dig deep on how to actually study and actually be able to learn something in order to teach it to somebody, because you can't just teach anything to somebody unless you know it and can talk a lot about it. So I had to do a lot of research. I had to do a lot of my own working in order to be able to keep making videos and keep being like interactive and informative at the same time. But overall, I like the Flipgrid. I like how I could be able to teach not my students, but teach my classmates different types of stuff.
Notice how he said, teach my students. That's really indicative of some of the attitude you get from these students. And that's where that community sense is coming in.
I feel like it was a good experience. I've never like had this experience before, so it was a really good experience overall, and I enjoyed doing it. And best part about being on Flipgrid is having your video posted, because it was good. That's probably the best parts about it, because then you just be like, yeah, that was a good video. But I appreciate it overall. It was really good.
So right there, you could see that sense of pride that a student would get from actually seeing their video go live. I had noticed a question in chat: if a student's video is wrong completely or in some aspects, how to prevent it being used by other students and regarded as authoritative fact. If it's got stuff that's wrong in it, you don't make it visible to the rest of the class. That's where you can kind of curate and manage that sort of stuff. But this is all kind of touchy-feely right now. We're just kind of talking about how it could be or what it seems like. I'm a real big believer in actually research-based data. And so what I'm going to present to you in the next few slides and the rest of the talk is actual assessment data that we did on this. Here, my class size is 47. This data comes from pre and post questionnaires, recorded interviews that have been coded and scored. We're trying to work on publishing this. Student evaluations, exam scores, and of course the student reflections themselves on Flipgrid. So we're specifically looking at impacts on sense of community in the class, sense of self-efficacy within the discipline, the sense of confidence with the topics, feelings about how much time they had with the instructor. We'll look at learning outcomes, and then we'll have this cool discussion, hopefully, on what kind of an assessment is this? Is it something that gets beyond some of the normal problems that we have with academic integrity? First, I'd like to share with you students' responses on peer teaching in general. So about 72% of the students thought they felt that peer teaching made them feel more engaged in the course. Over a majority of them felt they had a better sense of connection with the teacher, and at least 2/3 of them thought that they learned the topic better precisely because they had to teach it. Looking specifically at sense of community, 98% of students reported feeling a strong sense of pride when their Flipgrids went public. And the motivations behind this, behind doing these Flipgrids, were kind of all over the map. About a quarter of them felt that their primary motivation for doing this was teaching others. They really got into that fact. Another quarter thought it was, felt that their main motivation was so they can display their knowledge to the teacher and feel that sort of pride. And then for the other half, it was just that they wanted to learn better. And to me, it doesn't matter which motivation they've got, so long as it's a motivation. Because all too often, especially in online classes, but even in on-ground classes, trying to get them motivated to learn a topic and get involved is sometimes tough. So we wanted to look a little bit deeper at the effects of the Flipgrid on self-efficacy in science. And so we looked specifically, do you feel a greater sense of mastery in science? And we got an overwhelming, about 74, 75% felt that they mastered it better because of having to teach it, if you will. For similarly, just looking specifically at biological concepts, since that's what I teach, that number is about the same. It's a little bit above 75% there. I have also asked the question is, do you see yourself as more of a science person? And I didn't explain at all what science person meant. I left that up to them to kind of figure that out. But what I was looking at here was looking at self-identification in STEM to see kind of what they felt. And a whopping 57% of the students responding, they're increased in their perception of themselves as a science person, which was really cool. Probably the biggest fact or the biggest piece of data to come out of this that I was most surprised by, but also most heartened by, was this one-on-one time with the professor. So 47% of the students felt that they had more one-on-one time with the professor than a normal on-ground class. And I think that's because each student got individual attention each week. And the time cost for me was actually less than what I would do when I do grading of like their written assignments and problem sets and such like that. And I think their feeling of getting face-to-face time and a visual response from the person, from the teacher, really made them feel like it was more one-on-one. About 43% thought it was about the same one-on-one in the class. And so if you take those two together, that means 90% of the students felt that they had as much or more one-on-one time with the professors in on-ground class. And to me, that made it a major success, because that means that they feel like at least they're getting some attention. They like the professor, probably that helps a lot, and they like the course better. Of course, these are all kind of, touchy-feely things about how students feel and react. What about the effects on their actual learning outcomes? And so what we did here is we took 10 exam questions. So we had a final exam at the end of the course, right? And there was a written final, kind of, what you'd normally expect. And we chose 5 questions that had a Flipgrid that was associated with it. So things that they had to teach in a Flipgrid. And then we selected 5 other questions that had an equivalent amount of difficulty. And yeah, how do you gauge difficulty? I'm teaching it for a while, so I kind of have an idea of what kind of questions appear, similar to others in terms of difficulty. And so we compared those two. And what we found was about a 12% increase in the grades that they got on the final for the ones that had a Flipgrid component. And so that seems to suggest that there's an actual effect on the learning and retention of the material. So learning outcomes actually seem like they're doing better because they've had to explain it. They remember themselves explaining it, and they can watch themselves explain it again, right? And so I tend to think that the amount of retention that you have when you have to present something yourself is going to be a lot higher than if you just read it in a book, looked at notes, looked at a PowerPoint, maybe did a problem set. And so in my view, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, is this becomes a completely different type of an assessment that's, I think, a lot more accurate and a lot more genuine, because you don't have to worry about whether they've got other devices when they're taking an exam or doing their thing. You don't have to worry about plagiarism, because you get to hear in their own words and their own thoughts, and you can see the wheels turning as they're explaining it, and you get to gauge whether or not they really get it or what parts they don't get. You can even tell by their tone of voice sometimes. And so that's why I like to pause the video. I'll be like, are you sure you get this little nuance here, etc. And it allows you to give this direct feedback, which I think is really, really helpful. I mean, the research suggests that, you know, the human brain learns by error correction. And so getting that error correction, that little change in the nuance directly face to face from the professor can have, at least it appears, significant impact. So it seems to build confidence. It seems to provide alternate explanations for important material. I did ask the question, I didn't show the data on it here, about where they learn the material best. You know, I tend to like that I'm, you know, I tend to think I'm an okay teacher. But the response that I got the most out of the students was, oh, I learned that concept better when so-and-so taught it, or when I saw this video. So a large percentage of students learned it better when they saw another student reteach it or re-explain it. And as much as it might hurt my feelings that I'm not the best teacher in the world, I loved it because they felt that they learned, and they did, at least from the grades that we got from the class. It really seemed to have a significant impact on it. So it didn't really matter to me that, oh, somebody else is kind of a star of the class right now. We like watching her videos because she does all these cool things and makes it fun. Maybe sometimes I can learn from some of that. I think I have in a couple of cases. And so that's fun to see. It's easy to grade. In terms of a rubric, you know, for any concept, you know, I used to do this peer teaching before we had Flipgrid and before the pandemic. It was a regular part of the class. We didn't do it as often. I think they had 2 topics through the whole course of the course that they had to do a peer teaching for. And I'd give them a video camera or tell them to do it on their phones. What's nice about this is it's just all laid up on the internet. It's really easy to set up and manage. It really became a great source of this extra material, and students tended to really respond well to it. But when I used to do this in terms of the rubric, I'd set up certain concepts, like, so for example, for the hydrophobic effect, they needed to touch on water cages, they needed to touch on entropy, they needed to touch on hydrogen bonds, a couple set of concepts that for a full explanation of this topic, they would need to address correctly. And you could listen to see if they checked off all the things they needed to do. If they did it correctly, you got an A. You can, you know, decide for yourself, you know, is this a model thing that you want to put for the class? They're missing a couple, you know, for each concept, depending on how many different things you can, you know, assign a percentage or a certain amount of weight to each one in terms of how you want to scale it. And then you just have a little checklist, you know, as you're looking at these, you can cross them off and say, oh yeah, they did that, they did that, they did that. And the beauty of this is once you've watched their video, you've been commenting on it as you went, that's probably added about 30 seconds to a minute onto your recording time, and then you're done grading.
Speaking of amount of recorded time, I gotta apologize. We are officially at the half hour. I'm fine sticking around. Dr. Panasic, I don't know if you're fine sticking around. I saw some great questions in the chat as well, making sure that people have access to your teaching profile, where I know you've shared a lot of resources. So people are more curious about your teaching can have access there. And obviously we have more sessions, you know, happening right now. They're kicking off right now. But you know, I also saw some questions in the chat from people like
and I plan
Stephanie.
to address them. So awesome. If folks want to stick around, we can go through a bunch of those. But otherwise, have a great day, and thank you for taking the time out to listen to my craziness.